I'm a huge fan of Joseph Kahn's feature films. Torque, I remember watching on DVD when it came out, getting a used copy at Rogers Video, and just watching it over and over again, listening to the commentaries, reading his reviews on the Chud message boards, where he discussed why they couldn't really do a physical stunt like Michelle Yeoh jumping her bike onto a train in Police Story, aka Super Cop, Police Story 3. And I just followed his career from then, from a feature filmmaking perspective. He became a super successful music video director. Actually, he was by the time he made Torque, doing stuff like the Taylor Swift music videos, as well as Britney Spears' Toxic. But like, feature films was always something that was a little bit out of his reach. I know that he always wanted a career in it. Like, he wanted to direct Neuromancer adaptation that he talked about how he had cracked. I believe his version was going to star Hayden Christensen. He did that Power Rangers short, which I thought was very fun, the Dark Power Rangers thing. And then he did Detention, a hyperkinetic slasher film that's like everything into it. And it could only really exist because Joseph Kahn funded that film himself, independently, millions of dollars, because he really believes in making the movies that he wants to make. And I remember when Detention came out, people were like, oh, Justin, that's a movie that you would make. And anytime anybody says that, I'm like, no. Then I watch a movie, I was like, yeah, that is the kind of movie that I would make. Hyperkinetic, everything stuffed into it, because it feels like you'll never get another chance to do something like this. But then from Detention, Bodied, which came out in 2017, that movie rules. I love that movie. I think it's like genuinely amazing, and the worst thing that Bodied ever did was not get a proper release and just be buried. I think it should be considered kind of like a classic, especially from that era. And due to it being sold to YouTube Red and just disappearing without a trace, and the only DVD is like a made-on-demand that looks like it has a photocopied cover, it's a real shame. I hope that it gets kind of a second life, whether it be through a physical media distribution or it just gets more well-known. So when Joseph Kahn had his new film coming out, another one that he funded completely independently himself, ICK, I was excited. I like his style, I like the perspective he had in his previous films, and I was playing Midnight Madness on Saturday, so it was probably going to pop with the crowd, especially in the way that he was talking very around it, that it was going to be like a monster movie that was inspired by The Blob, but it also was a reflection of culture today, whatever that may mean. And I was almost ready for something that wasn't what you would expect, that it was going to be kind of like a swerve, in the same way that Detention was a slasher, time travel, everything but the kitchen sink kind of movie. But ICK is very much like The Blob. Like, if you're going to compare it to something, there's a big creature that is red and very blood colored, that the main gimmick is there's this town, or they actually say it's all across the United States, that there's this weird stuff that's been growing, and it's been growing there for decades, hasn't done any damage, doesn't seem to be a problem, and people have just kind of learned to live with it. But then suddenly the stuff starts to move, starts killing people, starts infecting them, starts possessing them. All right, we got a plot here. It's kind of like Edgar Wright's The World's End, in the way that like the ICK itself is trying to take over a town, make it better, have a uniformity, if you will. Brandon Routh stars in the movie as, you know, the beginning sets up in the best scene, which is you basically see his entire life from being a super popular football jock star to an injury to where his life is now as a 45-year-old science teacher. It's an amazing sequence. It moves super fast in that classic Joseph Kahn way. You get like these musical drops, so many musical drops. This film is like 50 songs of the early 2000s. If you were alive in a particular age, so basically now over 30, you will recognize all of these songs. And he is kind of the central, almost like Bruce Campbell like figure in the middle of this movie. And I gotta say, I've always kind of liked Brandon Routh. I found that he's a very charming presence and figure, and this movie understands it very well, that like that charm is really important to follow a character that, like everybody else in the movie, is kind of uninterested in what's happening. Now, he knows it's a threat, and he also knows that, you know, he needs to warn people and they need help. But one of the main jokes of the movie is that, you know, like COVID, they know that when it finally starts killing people, they decide, let's just ignore it. We've lived with it up until now. There's no problem. We can keep doing this. But of course, they can't. All right, so I've done the setup. I've talked about how much I love Joseph Kahn, and I have to actually get to the movie review part of the film, which is I don't like it very much. And the reasons why are all kind of like little ones that add up. So it feels like Joseph in this movie, as a director, he has his hyperkinetic style, but he's pulled it back a little, and by consequence, it feels kind of detached, fast, but too slow at the same time. You also have a plot that, because it's about like, oh, there's this creature, and then it starts attacking people, and then they don't treat it seriously, it forges a kind of stop-start structure to the story that, like, right when it feels like it's revving up, it suddenly pulls the brake, and you lose the main threat throughout. And, you know, threat is, I think, the most important word here, which is it's not really present in this film. And that's almost like baked into the premise that it is a satire. I mean, that's very obvious, but you still need that kind of like suspenseful element with this kind of movie. And Joseph Kahn is never able to pull it off. You never feel scared. And one of the reasons is the tone, which is very glib and kind of sarcastic, which has been the case for all of his movies previously. But it's also that just the way that the ick itself is presented on screen. So it's like this big glob thing that can do anything. So like it can like grab people, it can explode them, and it's all rendered through CGI effects, which I have to say, very impressive, like very well thought out in the way that you can feel like a commercial director thinking about every shot, and there's seemingly thousands of them in which the ick appears. And because of that, what you get is no visceralness to any of the movie. And that's like, it's one of its big stumbling blocks, which is like the threat never feels like a threat. That like people are being exploded, they're being ripped apart. It's very violent, but it's throwing back to an 80s film where you could feel the goo, you could feel the rubber. That was like the elements that pulled you into it, and there's nothing there. It just feels kind of cold and distant. And because there's never a threat, and the characters are treating the things as a threat, there's a big problem with the movie, which is that like, you don't feel it's gross on screen because it's so polished. The characters don't care, and so you're just kind of sitting there going, oh, okay. And it's not really that funny. Then you have like a start-stop structure. Brandon Routh is great in the movie, like I said, but all the other teenage characters get almost no definition. They're very well portrayed by the actors, but they have nothing to work with. Basically, the teenagers are defined for being like woke and not being committed to whatever that wokeness is speaking, specifically a kind of like jerk character who ends up becoming a villain later on. But even the like main protagonist, you have a girl who may or may not be Brandon Routh's daughter. That is her defining trait. And she also wants to leave town, so that's discussed a lot. You have a guy that drew a monkey, and you have a woman that's obsessed with the guy that drew a monkey. And they are basically your main characters. This is a movie that, like, as I watch it and as it played, and there's one particular scene involving a car crash that the movie just completely lost me because the characters don't feel threatened, even though that they should, and then it feels like nothing matters, which hurts everything that comes after. Of like, I was thinking watching the movie, like, how would I fix this? And it is so baked in the bones. I don't know how you would go about, like, maybe recutting this. I know this is a sales title, which means that, like, they're looking for someone to sell it to. Edits can still be made, like, it doesn't have a locked-in release date or anything. So I don't know if there's tinkering to, like, up the suspense somehow, or just kind of have more of a threat. Man, it's such a bummer, because I love Joseph Kahn films. I think he's a great director, and this one just didn't work for me at all. And like this kind of like splattery Bruce Campbell-ish like movie, it should be my kind of bread and butter. I love this kind of stuff, and it just fell completely flat for me. Like, I saw this at the premiere at Midnight Madness, and it was really a bummer, as you can feel the audience go, oh no. Like, no one was applauding, no real laughs. It just kind of just stayed there. Maybe, you know, this is a movie that, like, I'll watch it a couple years down the line, and I know I will again, because I'm a huge Joseph Kahn fan. And I'll be like, you know what, I was too harsh on it. Expectations were too high. And you know what, it actually does a bunch of stuff that works right now. But the more I think about it, and the more I had that experience of seeing it in the screening, it just bummed me out. I was hoping for something that the movie just wasn't in there, and I do hope that maybe it gets recut a little bit, like I said, and there's a better version that can get out there. And I hope that Joseph Kahn makes more movies. God damn, like, why can't somebody just give Joseph Kahn to make movies? He's very good at it, and I want to see more of them, and I want to see them just get better and better. Escape from the 21st Century is a mainland Chinese film that plays like the kind of hyperkinetic editing, filming that people have been threatening will completely consume the world of entertainment thanks to things like YouTube and the TikToks, but that we really don't get that much, especially in North America. That kind of style is something that I associate more with like internet entertainment from places like Taiwan or Japan, and when it's done in a feature film format of like hyper editing, cutaways, gags, on-screen animation, I just love it. I know it's sometimes a little bit too much for some people, and this is definitely a film that if you don't get on its wavelength, you will not like it at all. But for me, this is the good stuff. The plot of Escape from the 21st Century is that there's three friends. It's 1999 on the planet K, which really looks like mainland China and probably has nothing to do with if you set it on a different planet and don't say that it's mainland China, then you can get around censorship issues. And that the three teenagers are living their best life, getting into fights, just, you know, having fun, when they suddenly fall in a bunch of toxic waste and they discover that when they sneeze, they jump 20 years into the future. They take this revelation very nonchalantly and start playing with what they can do by doing this time traveling, and then start to figure out that, oh man, their lives, because they're jumping into their future bodies, it may not be as fun as it first appears to be. So you have this hyperkinetic movie that, again, gag, you know, breaking the world every chance that it can get, and then about halfway through turns into a very kind of serious treatise on realizing that like your future self will suck and that you really can't do anything about it, because like one of the rules in the movie is that like if fate has decided that that's what it's going to be, you can't change that fate. Of course, you can do some fun time traveling Bill and Ted style shenanigans later on, but it's very loosey-goosey. Like the time travel in this movie, it's definitely not airtight. Don't question it too much. But because of the whole tone of the film, it doesn't really bother me in the same way that like the time traveling in Looper makes me ask more questions and makes me feel disconnected from it. Here, because it's so propulsive, it's just super fun. The director co-directed a film many years ago called Lee's Adventure, which starred J.C. Chan, son of Jackie, which had a similar kind of like video game inspired time travel plot, but he had seemed to be put in movie jail for a long time. And here you get him making a picture that feels like the buildup of all the years that he wasn't able to put stuff on screen. So you get like the energy, the vibe, the music, tons of anime inspired visuals. You know, this is going to be compared to stuff like Scott Pilgrim, but like it feels so personal to the director, and also approaches things in ways that you wouldn't expect, with like the big dive into hyper melodrama in the middle that may or may not work for you. Did work for me, before swerving into more like Stephen Chow-esque comedy in the end and the big climax, or expectations you may have of genre like this is an action movie, but I wouldn't go see it to see like action scenes, because it's more like the idea of action scenes and the gags you can do with it, as opposed to the excitement that can be derived from like the action happening on screen. This is going to be a cult classic. It's very reminiscent of a film that Midnight Madness played a couple years back, unfortunately during COVID, called Get the Hell Out, which was also unfortunate because it was a zombie film that had to do with a pandemic, but it had that kind of like hyper style that I heard one critic talk about, that like it's very reminiscent of stuff like Taiwanese television, or even like mainland, that's very reminiscent of the kind of like a hyperkinetic energy that you see in Asian cinema, and you don't really see that much in the kind of like North American variety. Here it's very pure and utilized in a way that like some people may find it scattershot, others may just think there's so many ideas that are just stacked on top of each other. And I mean, I connected with it. There's like pure Stephen Chow-esque gags in this that like had me chuckling just thinking about them leaving the theater, and I can't wait to just show people this movie. People that I know will be on, you know, it's similar wavelengths, but that's what this kind of film, like a cult classic that's just waiting for an audience to find it. I hope someone picks it up. Probably will go. They usually do mainland Chinese films in this kind of area, and I hope that it doesn't get buried on some streaming service, but really gets the attention it deserves, and that its director gets to make more movies. I mean, if this feels like a culmination of everything that he's been wanting to do, it really fascinates me about like, well, okay, so what is his next movie? Is it another time travel stuff? What other ideas are percolating in his head that he needs to just like splatter all over the screen?